We'll be animating the computer screen now, and we have two stages of this computer screen. We have the generating consciousness part, and we have the face that will be revealed once the consciousness has been generated. We want this to happen in the middle of our scene, so 5 seconds in, we'll have the face appear. So we'll just cut these layers over here. We don't need them beforehand, so we'll just trim them to when they are going to come in. The reason why we've cut the face layers here is this reduces preview and render time, and it is much clearer to understand which layers are currently on screen and which ones we can ignore. So the face layers we can ignore up until this point. Now let's focus on the generating bar. We will want to animate this bar filling up. We'll create shapes from this vector layer. We'll remove the vector layer. Something that can sometimes happen when you create shapes is you get a group within a group and an additional merge path. We'll just remove these, and then we'll highlight these paths and add a keyframe. Since we have all the paths highlighted, we only need to click the stopwatch once, and it will add a keyframe to all the other paths. We'll move this to the beginning of our scene, and we'll now animate the paths to fill up. We'll add a 75% velocity here. This means it will start animating in quickly, and then it slows down to a very smooth stop. We'll set a marker here, so we know that this is the middle of our scene, and this is when the face will come in. We want to fade these layers out, so we'll add an opacity keyframe here, and 50 frames later, it will be at 0. We'll add an easy ease to that. And we want the same for the face screen. We can just copy these keyframes and paste them onto the screen. Now, as the generating consciousness type fades out, the face fades in. What we want to do now is animate this face a little bit and give it a little bit of character. So we'll be animating these irises, but since we're animating them together, they'll never move separately. We can just parent them to a null object. We'll create a null object by hitting Command or Control Shift Alt Y, move it above our irises, trim it, and rename it immediately. So I'll call it Control Face Iris. Always name your layers, otherwise you might lose track of which null object, shape layer, or solid does what. So it's very important to keep your naming clean. Reposition it to an approximate center between the two objects and parent them with the pig whip. Now we can add our keyframes to the controller rather than to two separate layers. We'll add a position keyframe here. 50 frames later, we'll move it down somewhere around here. We'll have a hold frame of 50 frames. 50 frames later, we'll have it maybe look at the bird over here. We'll add a hold frame again. And towards the end, it will go back to its original position. We will add a 75% velocity to this. Now let's scale the mouth up and down. We'll start with 100, and 50 frames later, it will scale down to 90%. We'll add an easy ease and a ping pong loop. We'll shift the mouth back 20 frames, so it's a little bit more dynamic and not everything is animating at the same time. We'll do the same with the eyebrows that we've done earlier. We'll create a null object and we'll animate the brows going up and down as the face looks around. At the hold frame, it will just move back down, so we can copy both of these, paste them, and do the same over here. We'll add a 75% velocity again, and we'll move these keyframes back to the beginning of our layers and copy one more keyframe. Now, we want our entire scene to loop, so we want the last frame to match the first frame. This is our first frame, so we can see that there is generated consciousness here, and at our last frame, we can see the face. We want the generating consciousness bar to fade back in. We'll copy these frames and time reverse keyframes, move them back into position, and do the same with the other fades. Now, as we can see, the generating consciousness bar is in a different position here. So what we want to do, we'll copy the first keyframes, paste them over here, highlight both of these, and toggle hold frame. That means our bar still animates in, but as soon as we do not see it anymore, it jumps back to our first keyframes. So once we see it again, it's at our first position. Now let's fade in this light over here. We'll add an opacity keyframe and fade it in from 0 to 100 over 20 frames. 10 frames later, we'll create a bit of a bounce. So we'll bounce the light down to 80 frames and 20 frames later back to 100. We'll now click on these keyframes with Command or Control held and ease this one. We'll fade this light out over 20 frames again. Let's check the beginning and the end of our scene. We have one little mistake here. As you can see, the mouth pops in just before the screen fades out. So we want to cut this so it doesn't do that. Now we have some consciousness being generated and our screen popping in.